Okay, guys, let's get started for the day. Let's start with our do now. So I'm going to come over to the Google Classroom page and we're going to come to today's do now. Give it a second to load. And what we're doing, you're going to go through, put your first name and last name, put your class period, and then you're going to look at this image of a 2-page spread and we're going to analyze it, right? We're going to kind of start to pick apart some of the different vocabulary terms. So let's see what you can pull out from this image based on what we've covered up to this point. Good morning. Go ahead and join the Google Meet, okay? All right, so when we're looking at this image, on the bottom left, very small, looks like the word or the number 300. So go through the list of terms that we've talked about up to this point in class and choose which one you think that one is. And then the other thing, the second question is, what is sudden impact? So when you're looking at this image here, look closely at the different parts of it, and what do you think sudden impact, this right in the middle, this largest thing right here, what do you think that is? So go through and answer these two questions, just check in for attendance. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll get started with the lesson. Make sure after you answer the two questions that you hit the turn in button on Google Classroom. Okay, so you should have been able to answer those two questions. Do your best guess. And then again, once you submit it, hit the turn in button on Google Classroom. So if you want to follow along with me, we're looking at week 3 magazine layout. So we've done 2 weeks up to this point. We'll do a little bit of review, and then we'll go through actually starting our project. You've done some planning up to this point, so you have a general idea of what you want to do, hopefully. If not, I'll start from scratch when I show you the demonstration, okay? All right, so we're looking at a music magazine layout. So let's review what our learning targets are. So we have looked at typographic vocabulary, so specifically vocab that relates to type, where we talked about fonts, we talked about leading, we talked about kerning and spacing, right? All of these things that are helpful to kind of apply to this assignment. The second learning target is you need to be able to explain how you use these different components in your composition of your project. So how do you use different fonts appropriately? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And the third learning target is you can create a 2-page music-themed magazine spread using Photopea. And I will walk you through this step by step. We're going to put this into 2 different chunks. So we'll start it this week. I'll review your progress, and then we'll come back and finalize it next week with the remaining components. Okay, so these are the 3 learning targets we're looking for. So identify vocabulary, understand how to use these different elements in your design, and then actually create the design. So those are 3 learning targets. All right, and we've talked about this a little bit already. I'm just kind of reviewing some of the basics, if you were not here the 2 weeks before we went on break. So what makes a magazine layout stand out? It needs to be read and understood as a visual experience, right? The way that you interact with what's here needs to be something that can flow and appeal to the readers, right? So we usually know when something's done incorrectly. We may not know what components are done wrong. We may not know specifically what's off about it, but we may just not even read an article because it's just too hard to read, right? So we need to analyze these different parts of a magazine article and make sure that our layout is easy to read and flows. So we talked about typography, right? It's the art of arranging letters, making sure that it's clear, it's legible, it's easy to read. When you're using these things correctly, you'll have a strong visual hierarchy, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. We've talked about this phrase before, visual hierarchy, but we'll focus on it in just a second. You have some balance in the overall design. It can set the tone of the article, and it can guide and inform the viewer. So what you're doing is basically leading them through whatever document, either it's digitally, it's online, or it's a magazine. It could be print, right? It could be a newspaper, whatever you're trying to present to somebody, you want to make sure that they're able to follow the content that you're producing. So specifically when we looked at visual hierarchy before, we focused on size, right? When we look at the level 1 for visual hierarchy, something that stands out the most is the largest, right? Usually with a heading, we'll have a display font or something that's kind of fancy over the top, or something that connects with the visual, right? Visual hierarchy, you think about the word hierarchy, you think about, a kingdom or a king, right? Well, we're saying the heading or the largest thing is the king of this document, right? Whatever we're looking at, be a magazine, newspaper spread, whatever, right? Or even something online. When you're looking at a website, you need to be able to tell where is the heading, what it has to guide me through the page, right? So the visual hierarchy will show you that by the larger size, right? The font may be a little bit different. We might go to a level 2 with a subheading or an intro paragraph, and then we'll go down to a level 3 with a body copy or body text. So you can see that right here in this visual, kind of pointing it out. And we already know this generally, but understanding and identifying it in our work and how we use it to make a more successful piece is what our goal is, right? All right, so let's look at this layout. So 3 of the biggest features: composition, main image, and headline. For those of you who have completed your week 2 assignment, most of you had already chosen your images. I'll start today from scratch and kind of pick an image off the internet and kind of show you how I would work with it, right? But in this case, we can see here's the headline over here. It's larger than everything else. Our eyes go down to the second layer, right, because it's slightly smaller, and it acts as a bridge in between the heading and the body copy. So we want to make sure we kind of stagger it in size so we can flow through the article and it's easy to read. Now, we did this last week or the week before break, the last time we looked at all this stuff, and you had to identify different parts of a magazine design. We are focused specifically on these different components right here because these are the ones that you're going to have in your final design that you turn in. Okay, so let's look at the visual here example. Right at the top, the largest size is the headline. You can see this is the intro. It's slightly smaller, a different font, just to make it more interesting to look at. C is the byline, so it could be if, who did the photograph, who wrote the article. In this case, you can just put the byline as you, okay, because you're just doing this overall design. We have the body text or body copy. That's this down here. This one is a 2-column example. I'll show you a 3-column example. I don't want you to do too much more than 2 or 3. It's too busy, okay? We have a large image over here. You could have your image on the left side. You can have it on the right side. It doesn't matter to me, whatever works best with the image that you chose. Think about how you use the white space or negative space. So on this, it's just kind of F, kind of floating in the middle. But see how your eye can kind of move around everything. There's a space in between the columns. There's a space around the person. you're not crowded with information. That way you can kind of ease into the article. You're not flustered, you don't know where to go, right? Because it's too busy, then you can't successfully convey that information. All right, things like a drop cap. So that bigger letter to start, right? When we think about like a fairy tale book like Grimm's Fairy Tales, or a little kid's book, they often will have these big drop caps, right? Illuminated manuscripts will have this too, way back in history. So you may have seen this concept where you have a big first letter. So you're going to have a drop cap in yours. You're going to need to have a page number at the bottom and a footer. And you can just make up a website. It can be your own, or it could just be the name of the magazine that you want to create. Whatever you want to put for your footer down at the bottom would work. And the final thing that you're going to need to do is a pull quote. Many of you chose lyrics from your musician, from your artist, from a song. You could have a phrase that this person is known for. Just obviously keep it in line with being school appropriate at all times. So review that content to make sure that it doesn't dance on that line. So if you're not sure, go with something else. Okay, but these are the requirements that we're looking to have in our final. Here it is available in Spanish, so you can read through it if that's helpful to you. And I just want to review the good layout and bad layout when it comes to the body copy. So remember, in this visual up here, you can see that the main areas that people are going to focus on are going to be on the top left and top right. Usually in European or American culture, we're going to start on the top left because that's what we read left to right. If you're in an Arabic place, they may start, or they have Arabic as a language, right? They may read from the other direction, so you may have more of a focus on the right side because they read from right to left. But for us, just knowing that these top two sections are the most important is where the eyes are going to go first. But I want you to understand when it comes to bad layout and good layout with body copy, you want to make sure, I'll pull this back, give me 1 second. You want to make sure that people's eyes aren't bouncing all over the place, right? You want to have a consistent flow. You can see how this layout, they're reading from the top, going to the bottom, then jumping all the way up here, top, bottom. See how crazy the eye line is, all up and down, all over the place. You need it to be consistent. So if you have a big image you want to have on the right or the left side, maybe you have your body copy on the opposite side, right? So that you don't have interruption of the flow. We want to make sure it's legible and it's readable. Okay? So make sure that you think about this when you're going to put in your text. And just a reminder, we're going to be putting in lorem ipsum, that's that dummy text. You're not actually typing an article for this. We're just going to bring in that bulk of text just for a reference point for the overall design. All right, so here are your requirements. You're going to do a 2-page spread. You should have already chosen your musician, band, or group, so it has to be music themed in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to walk you through step by step how to do it all in Photopea. It has to be sized 11 inches by 17. We're just going to keep a standard 2-page. Usually if you're in the field, it's something slightly different. The numbers are a little bit different, but close enough for us. We'll just keep it general. So by the end of this week, you need to have your document opened. You need to have a headline, 1 to 2 images. Try not to do more than 2 images. So maybe one larger one smaller one if you want, but one larger, good size one, good quality, high resolution one will probably work. You need to have your byline, and then I want you to have your intro or your stand first. Okay, so those 4 components are what I'm looking for. You'll turn it in this week. I'll kind of review what you've done, give you suggestions, feedback, kind of give you a progress grade on what you've done up to this point. And then you can fine tune things for next week where you'll turn in the remaining things. So the body copy, the drop cap, the page numbers, footer, and pull quote. Okay, so that'll be due on the 30th. Okay, so let's go through and start this all together. So my first step, if I'm starting this project, is I'm going to go to Photopea. So I'm going to open up a tab. And we've all been here a million times. We know this site. I'm going to start a new project. So once it opens, I'm going to click New Project. And I'll just call this My Music Layout. You can call it whatever you want, as long as you remember. We're going to change it from pixels to inches, just so we can kind of keep a good frame of reference for what we understand for the size. And I'm going to go back and check. Let's make sure that we're doing it the right size. So the photo piece size, 11 inches by 17 inches. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do 17 for my width because it's 2 pages right next to each other. And my height is going to be 11. And then I'm going to hit create. And as you're watching this now, don't worry, I'm going to record this and post it like I usually do. I'll upload it through YouTube, so if you need the translations, you can auto-translate with the closed captions, and you can follow along and kind of stop the video to kind of see each step. All right, so you'll notice something different on mine, and that is because I turned on the ruler. So if you go up to view, we have not done this before. You'll see under view at the top, rulers, see how that's checked? It may look like this. Usually, when we open this up, it looks like this. There's nothing around it, right? But if I go up to view and I turn on my rulers, I can see some measurements happening here. That's going to help me with my layout and design, because what we're going to do is we're going to drag down something called grid lines. And it's kind of like training wheels for a drawing. We're going to use these grid lines to kind of help us keep everything lined up and looking sharp, right? It's going to help us with our overall design to make it look balanced and even. And then at the end, we turn them off. So kind of like when you're learning to ride a bike, right? You have the training wheels on there. It kind of helps you. It supports you. And then once you know how to ride the bike without it, you feel confident. You take off the training wheels. We'll take off the grid lines. Okay. All right. So let me hop back over here. All right. So I'm going to go up to view. And I want to show a grid underneath because the grid is going to help me get a nice understanding of what's happening. So here I can see a grid. It's almost like grid paper in a math class, right? I'm going to drag down these guidelines and I'm going to set up my bleed along the outside edges and I'm going to set up my gutter in the middle, okay? So I'm going to go from the top here and I'm going to drag down so you can pull down under view. So we want to bring down some guidelines. There we go. So I'm just going to click on my ruler at the top and see this little blue line that came down? I'm going to pull it down and I'm going to stop it at that first line. So I'm giving myself basically a border line. I'm going to come down from the top again and I'm going to put one at the very bottom. And again, I'm lining it up with the grid. I'm going to come from the left-hand side because you notice that the ruler that's there is only at the top and the left, right? So I'm going to come from the left-hand side, click on my ruler, and bring over another guideline. And I'm going to put it right here along this side. And then I'm going to bring in a second one here. So basically what I've created is an outside edge that I'm not going to put anything there, right? Because if I was going to, print any document, I may not be able to get it perfectly lined up with and go to trim it. So I always want to leave a little bit of extra just in case. So we're going to leave that little bit of extra there just to frame it and nothing goes in those outside edges, right? The second thing I want to do is I want to bring in where my gutter is. And my gutter is right in the middle. And you don't want to have something run right down the middle because think about a magazine that opens and folds. If you have something going into the middle, say your text was going into the middle, you couldn't read it. So you need to have that separation so that there's a little bit of wiggle room for if a document is opened, okay? So I'm going to go to the left-hand side, and I'm going to find the middle of my document, and using my ruler, I can see it's right there at 600. So that tells me where the middle is. Now I want to make sure on either side of that fold line or the middle where the gutter is that I have a little bit of extra space too. So I don't want to put anything to the left of that line, and I don't want to put anything to the right of that line. So those 3 lines right there are going to help me understand not to put anything in that middle section. That's where that gutter is, and I don't want anything to be where the fold is. All right, now at this point, I can kind of figure out where do I want to put my text in here? How do I want to arrange it? I may have an idea kind of in my head. I may change this, but I'm going to put some lines in here to figure out where my columns for my text, my body copy is going to go. So I'm going to do a 3-column spread on both pages. You could make it a 2-column if you want, so it's up to you what you like. I'm going to click on the ruler, and I'm going to come over, and I think I'll do one at 200. I'll do another line at 400. So that's my my left-hand page. I have 1, 2, 3 columns. And I'll come over to the other page on the right, and I will do one at 800 and one at 1,000. All right, so I have a general understanding of where my body copy is going to go. My columns, my text is down here for my lorem ipsum. I'm going to go up to the top, and I'm going to turn off the grid just so I can see where the guidelines are and see how it looks. So I'm going to go up to View, and I'm going to turn off my grid, so where it says Show here. All right, so now I have my page laid out, and I can kind of see this is my left-hand side, this is my right-hand side. Both pages are here next to each other. Now, at this point, you may already have an image that you've chosen, but I'm just going to start it from scratch. So if you're somebody who's starting with scratch, you can kind of go along with me. I'm just going to choose an artist. So I'm going to go to Google. And if I'm looking for images, so I'm going to click on images. Now, remember, we want a high resolution. So we want a large file size. And I can kind of go through my images, and I can choose that by going to Tools. So I can click right here on Tools, go to Size, and I'm going to choose Large. All right, from these images, I want to think about my layout, think about my spread. What do I want to do? So I'm just going to scroll through, find one that I like. I mean, obviously, I'm leaning towards the colorful ones. I'm loving this rainbow one, so let's click on this one. You can see right there the file size, 1800 by 1200 pixels. That's a very large file size. If I had a file that was like 200 by 200 and I try to stretch it, it'll become all blurry because the computer's trying to figure out what is in between this information. I don't have enough content, right? So if I need to resize this, it's big enough that I shouldn't have too many issues, okay? So I'm just going to come on here, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to copy the image. I'm going to come back to Photopea, and I'm going to do Edit and Paste. All right, so my picture comes in, it's way too big. I need to resize it. I'm going to come up to Edit, and I can do Free Transform or I can do Transform. Either one will work. I'm just going to do Free Transform. And always make sure you're holding down Shift when you resize. Shift will keep the proportions the same so we don't distort anything, stretch it too much in one direction or another. Okay, so if you ever had that happen where you adjusted an image and you didn't hold down Shift, you may have like stretched it weirdly and it looks kind of off. We don't want to stretch somebody's face, so we want to make sure that it looks accurate. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, and I'm just going to grab a corner, and I'm going to resize this. And I think I want to have it just on one side. So I want to get her face big enough that I can fit it on one side of this document. All right, and I know this is my gutter, so I don't want her face running into the gutter, so I'm going to kind of move it over here. That's pretty good. I think I'm okay with that. All right, once I like where it's at, I'm going to hit Enter. Now what happened over here, I have this white space, the picture isn't big enough, and if I make it too much bigger, it's going to look weird, like her face is going to be off the page. I don't want to do that. So I can fill in this section over here. I can just draw using one of my rectangle selects, and I could just select this section. And I'm going to show you, and some of you have shown this before, but not everybody. So I'll walk through this. I'm going to select the inverse and choose over here, and I'm going to use what's called a clone tool. So I'm going to take this area right here, and I'm going to bring it over here, right? So I'm going to use my clone tool. I'm going to click over here, it says clone tool, and I'm going to hold down my Alt key, and I want to choose a bigger brush, so I'm going to choose a bigger one up here. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And see how the little plus shows up? It shows me where I'm choosing from. I'm going to go up to select, and I'm going to select inverse again. And I'm going to come over here to my white area, and I'm going to draw in here. And can you see this little plus sign where it's pulling from? Right, so I can choose again. So I'll select inverse. I'll come over here and hold Alt. Select inverse, and I'll come back over again. And I can kind of blend things out. Now, oh, I went too far, right? Remember, if you make a mistake, you can always go back in your history and take a step back, right? And try it again. And I think I'm just going to deselect and just pull from over here and see if I can blend this out a little bit better. So I'm going to choose Alt again. I'll pull from this general area. Just kind of get some of this. And I can go in and blend it. So I can use something like a smudge tool. I can use a blur tool, right? I'll use smudge. And again, I'm going to take a bigger size so I can kind of fade it in nicely. And just kind of blend and see what happens here. I'm going to push it around. I don't want it to be too distracting. Now I could put a solid color in here, but the background has some variation. It has some gradient change from light to dark. So I'm just kind of playing around with it, seeing what I like. So I've got my image in here, right? So the biggest thing when you start is that you need to make sure you have your ruler on, make sure you bring your guides down so you can use that to help you, all right? Now let's go in. I think I want to put my headline in. So I'm going to grab another guide, and I think I want to keep my headline in this general vicinity up here. I'm going to go to my type tool right here, click on my type tool, and I'm going to click on my grid and drag to where I want my type to go. All right, so I can start typing inside here. See the little cursor showed up? I can type in here. I want to make sure it's a large size, and I'm probably going to choose a color that's lighter. And I can just type in, I'm just going to type headline. Obviously, you don't type headline. Come up with something that makes sense for yours. And I can make this larger if I need to. And I can play around with fonts. Now, when you look at the headline, right, that's the perfect place to put in a display font. So I can come over here to my fonts, click on my drop down, and choose something that's different, something that I want to stand out. That's a little bit too rugged, I think, for this one. So I'm thinking about the feeling of my picture. So depends on what's in my picture, right? So she kind of has a soft kind of look to it. The aesthetic is kind of airy, rainbows, prism, you know, it's kind of light. So I'm going to choose something that's kind of flowy that works with that. So I'm just going to look through my different fonts and try to find something that works with what I have happening here. And then again, I can adjust my size, play around with it. And maybe I want to move it down a little bit. I can adjust it, right? So there's my headline. Obviously, you can change it up, change what you want to put there. I'm going to bring in a line to kind of put where my byline is going to go. And if we look for the requirements for this week, so I'll hop back over here. We have a headline, we have an image, we need a byline and an intro. So those two more things. Let's come back over here. So I'm going to drop down a grid line, and I'm going to put my byline right in here. So in this section right here. So I'm going to come over to my type tool. I'm going to click and drag, and it'll just go to where the grid lines are that you tell it where it's at. Okay, so you got to put the grid lines down, and then you can make a text box right inside there. And I'm just going to say this is by me. Right, so I can adjust what's in here. See if I can select all of this. I think it won't show up because it's too big of a size. So let's reduce our size. Because remember, we need to make sure that we're consistent with the information we're trying to share. The byline, although it's important, whoever wrote the article or whoever took the picture is important, it should not be bigger than the headline, right? So keep it relatively small in comparison. The next part of information that I need to have is my intro. So I'm going to bring down one more grid line, and I'm going to put my intro somewhere in here. I'm going to draw my text box. Now, this is where you could type something if you wanted to. If you wanted to put a lyric in here for your intro, your stand first, or if you wanted to just put in lorem ipsum, it's up to you. A reminder of how to do that. So I'll kind of walk through this real quick. So when I'm bringing in lorem ipsum, I can literally just type it in. And there's generators, so you just click on it and you just copy and paste. So however many paragraphs you want, right? So I can click on one of these generators. Oops, sorry, I want to go back to this one. So I'm going to click on one of these generators, and it'll say, okay, how many paragraphs do you want? This says 5 paragraphs. I just need one, so I'm just going to take some of this. I'm just going to copy it. Right-click and copy, and then come back over here, and I'm going to right-click, or I'm going to go up to edit and paste. So right-click or edit and paste. And it'll bring in the lorem ipsum, and then I can change the size of it, and I can adjust it. All right? So again, you go to a generator, you just come in here, and you right-click and copy, right? Control C, same thing. And I'll come back over here, and I can do paste, or I can do edit up here and paste and bring it in this section right here. All right. Now remember, when you're bringing in anything that has to be like the intro or the body copy, that font should not be a display font. It needs to be legible. So it needs to be easy to read. And you don't want anything crazy with like swirls and loops all over the place because it's going to be difficult to read. So go with something that's more basic, right? Just keep a very simple one. Think about keeping the size around 11 or 12. And then that's where you would bring it in and paste it in this section right here, okay? So for this week, this is what you need to have, okay? Headline, your images. So if you have just one image, that's fine. If you have 2, if you want to bring a second one in, that's fine too. I wouldn't do any more than 2 because it gets too busy. You need your byline and your intro and stand first, okay? So for this, I'll just type a couple things in here. See if I can type in this. It'll show up. So I'll just put some letters in here for right now, just so we have something in here so you can see it. Remember that that intro should be slightly smaller than your headline, but not as small as your body copy down here. Okay, so you put in the lorem ipsum in there, and then we'll go and save for this week. So to file, and remember, we're always going to save it twice, one for your version with the layers, and then the one that you turn in. So save as a PSD, so file, save as a PSD for you. That will download to your computer. Then go file and export as a JPG file. When you export as a JPG, this little box shows up, you hit save, and your JPG file, remember, does not have the individualized layers. It just has basically a picture of what you have so far, okay? And the JPG file is the one that you'll be turning in for this week. All right? So this is your demo on what you need to do. Again, I will post this video kind of walking you through step by step how to do this. I'm gonna come back to you guys. So does anybody have any questions? Any questions about what we've covered? I know a few of you joined late, so make sure you go back in and get your do now done, right? And just to reiterate, when we're reviewing this stuff, you want to understand your typography, vocabulary, right? You understand how to use these different elements. You want to understand how it needs to be arranged on the page, right? And you need to actually create these things in Photopea. So this is what you need to have as your requirement for this week. All right, any questions at all? Any questions? Any questions in the classroom? Issues, questions? Everybody's good? All right, I'm gonna give you this time to work. All right, and then let me know if you have any issues. You can hop back on the call. You can ask me, you can put it in the chat, or you can message me on Google Classroom. All right, let's use this time to work. Just a reminder, if you did not know, we have intervention at 1:45 is block 6 today. So block 6 today. All right, go ahead and get to work. Let me know if you have any issues, okay? All right. All right.